How satisfied people are with their professional, financial, and life situation influences the way they think, the way they make decisions, the way they communicate and interact with others, the way they handle challenge, and the solutions they propose and deliver. But life satisfaction varies widely across countries in the world, different places within countries, professions, sectors, and even with factors such as education and age. The connections between these factors and life satisfaction are often obscure and outright puzzling. The corporate leaders I coach, train, and advise do business across many countries and continents, and they have to make good decisions fast and often based on limited information. That can be hard, especially in these fast-changing and crisis-ridden times, which is why they like seeing quantified data sets about issues that are usually a little bit hard to understand and look fairly subjective. This is where think tanks and polling companies like Ipsos and research papers like Ipsos's Global Happiness Index come in very, very useful. But I was quite surprised to see not only the results of this year's polls, but also the reactions in the media and social media about these results. I am Gabor Holch, intercultural leadership consultant, previously working out of Shanghai, China for 20 years, and currently splitting my time between Europe and Asia. Ipsos's Global Happiness Index is a country ranking based on answers that people in each country gave to questions like how satisfied they are with their financial situation, living condition, physical and mental health, work and colleagues, government, and even the way they look. Of course, how people answer these questions depends on many factors. The most obvious ones are how much money they have, how beautiful their home is, how safe and satisfying it is to live in their neighborhood, what kind of colleagues surround them when they go to work, do they have a job, and of course, how handsome they are. But life satisfaction is also very cultural. Anybody who has lived abroad, visited many countries, or even has friends or enjoyed books and films from many different nations know that given the same level of well-being, people from certain cultures tend to see the world more happily or tragically than others. Now, happiness may look fleeting and subjective, but it is very important in business and leadership too. By the way, the Ipsos survey uses happiness and life satisfaction interchangeably, so we will do the same here. In either case, whatever we call it, it's very important in business, and that's why the multinational executives that I usually coach welcome studies like Ipsos, because basically such polls quantify something that otherwise would be fuzzy and subjective. Not only that, but such polls can turn these issues into the easy visuals that companies all over the world like. Just think about it. In a negotiation situation or in a situation when somebody is leading a team, people who are more satisfied with their life situation have more self-confidence, they believe more in themselves, experience less stress, deal with conflict better, and therefore they are more likely to be able to deliver a win-win solution or at least take a win-win perspective. The Ipsos study even shows a correlation between happiness and consumer confidence. In other words, satisfied people seem to spend more easily or more, or probably both. Now, if you work with somebody, if you are in business with somebody who has a higher level of life satisfaction, who is happier than you are, for example, you negotiate a deal with them or you are their superior at the firm, you may find that this imbalance between the levels of life satisfaction can be to your disadvantage. People who believe in themselves more, they are harder to influence. They are more likely to think that they are right in a certain situation. If they experience less pressure because they are happier and more balanced, it means they can make better decisions. In this case, very importantly, better decisions than you, if your life satisfaction level is a little bit lower. And of course, if it's a negotiation and if you're somebody's boss, then it can easily turn into a negotiation of holidays, raises, bonuses, and so on. Whoever proposes the most constructive solution is likely to end up with an outcome that they like or they can own, which is another reason why an imbalance in life satisfaction can influence negotiation and leadership situations. So this is why, especially when you do business across different cultures, different countries, different continents, having a rough idea about the self-satisfaction level of the people you are dealing with, at least as a big picture national average, can greatly help you to manage your expectations, use your words carefully, and propose solutions that are more likely to be accepted. Now, after this introduction, maybe it is clear why studies like the Ipsos Happiness Index is so important. And when I looked at the index first, I had several surprises about the outcome, but above all, it was China, the country where I did business for 20 years and even do a lot of my business there, came out as many bloggers and journalists put it, the happiest country in the world. Why was I surprised at this result? Not because I doubt that people can have a happy life in China. I did it for 20 years. But there were a couple of factors that made this result unexpected. One of them is that the data was collected at the turn of 2022 and 23, exactly as China was coming out of a very, very harsh, long COVID lockdown, something that is better known as zero COVID policy. Now, when I gave it a second thought, I thought, wait a minute, this could actually be a reason for people to be happy, because as they were coming out of the lockdown, they experienced a significant improvement in their life situation, and that made them feel happy when Ipsos sent out the questions and asked them about their life quality. But then again, there was another issue, is that if we go a little bit deeper into the study and see the sub-issues that the specific questions were about, according to the study, Chinese people predominantly, I think if you look at the study, it's around 90%, seem to be very satisfied with issues which are generally not working very well in China. For example, healthcare. Think about a very overwhelmed healthcare system after 3 years of continuous COVID lockdowns on and off in China. Or, for example, employment situation, whereas many of you who deal with China know that especially youth unemployment is at an all-time high in China right now. Okay, so why would a poll like the Ipsos study show an incorrect picture? One of the things that we have to know about polling data collected out of China is that in China, indicators are very often used not as measurements of existing situation, but more like targets for the country to meet. A couple of examples could be, for example, the Ease of Doing Business Index by the World Bank that China took so seriously that actually, I think in 2017, it set up a specific government department to find out how the index work and adjust those economic indicators to keep up the country's international image, sometimes known as soft power. Another illustration could be the country's PISA ranking, which is a ranking based on the quality of a nation's education system. And again, China took this ranking so seriously that it made sure that only elite schools in a couple of major cities were included, and that's how China got its stellar ranking in studies comparing countries according to education ranking. So I assume that, for example, when the respondents were selected for this Ipsos study on happiness, probably there is something that we have to find in the fine print. And I didn't have to look very, very long until I actually found it. And it is this phrase towards the end of the study. So if we look at it this way, then you can say this study is fairly skewed because it's a comparison between the average Dutch with the fairly affluent, educated, urban Chinese citizen. But it's not only about China. I think it's equally true about some countries towards the top of the ranking, like Saudi Arabia. Now, at this point, you could simply dismiss the study as irrelevant, but I don't think it is. One reason is that China has consistently ranked high in the Ipsos Happiness Index over a couple of years. Take a look at a few reports over the years. It was always in the top 5 or so. I will tell you a couple of anecdotal evidence about why Chinese people are satisfied with their lives, which I experienced over many, many years in China. But if you compare this with other studies, for example, studies about motivation, studies about believing in the future, then you can see that China is indeed one of the most optimistic countries in the world. But even if we assume that this study is not about the average general Chinese population, because lots and lots of people live under very, very hard conditions, even if this is just about an urban educated elite from, let's say, the 5 biggest cities in China, it is still a very relevant study for executives, managers, entrepreneurs, decision makers doing business in China or with China. Let me tell you why. When business people read the Ipsos study, the reason why they read them is exactly what I mentioned before. They want to have a general picture of the confidence level, of the life satisfaction level, of the self-assuredness level of the people they negotiate deals with, of the people they are going to supervise as leaders, of the people who are going to be their customers, their suppliers, their government regulators, and so on. And when it comes to this, the urban, educated, pre-selected elite from some of China's top major cities is exactly what most international business people are going to meet. Studies I rely on in my forthcoming book, Dragon Suit, show that over 90% of the foreigners who arrive in China as business visitors or expatriates arrive and stay in the 3 biggest cities, or let me say group of cities in China: Beijing, Shanghai, and the Guangzhou-Shenzhen conurbation. Virtually all the centers, the business centers of China branches of multinational companies are in these 3 cities too. So if you're a manager who is going to move to China for a year or 2 in order to take care of your company's business, or travels to China to negotiate deals, or as a specialist, or even if you are somebody who jumps on a Zoom call every now and then with Chinese business partners, believe me, the people on the other end of the table or the other end of the call are going to be much farther from the statistical national mainstream than their equivalents in a country like Germany, Japan, Australia, or South Africa. They are going to be exactly the pre-selected, affluent, urban, highly educated elite that the Ipsos study asked for their life satisfaction here. In other words, those are the people you have to know as an international business person or an expat. Those are the people whose level of self-assurance is going to influence your business success. At this point, let me tell you a couple of things that in my experience gives Chinese people the kind of self-assurance, the kind of life satisfaction, call it happiness if you want to, that the Ipsos study reflects. The first one is a sense of purpose, which, as you will see in the study, is extremely important, in many ways the most important for all of us to feel satisfied and happy. And Chinese people excel at this for quite a few reasons. One of them is, for the last 20 years, China has been operating under one or another large national development program, anything from the 2008 Olympic Games to the 2010 World Expo in Shanghai, the first Chinese space program, the high-speed train network, but also just the 5-year plans and some of the central issues in the 5-year plans in China, such as growing the country's GDP steadily, reducing pollution, building a sustainable energy industry. These kind of large national programs give people a sense of purpose. Actually, one of the things that is often considered a risk factor in China for international business people, and definitely for the international media, the one-party system is very good at enthusing people with large national goals that they can be passionate about. And when you visit China, you will see that people are extremely proud of anything from the public transport system to their scientific accomplishments and down to their 5,000 years of history, which they never stop hearing from their leaders. Another very important factor for life satisfaction happiness if you want, according to the Ipsos study, is connectedness. The lonelier we are, the unhappier we are. And China is a very connected nation for many different reasons. One is a traditional, close-knit, if you want to use the vocabulary from intercultural research, collectivist approach to life, of generations looking after each other, of people keeping in touch with their former classmates, of people borrowing from each other when they want to start a business and so on, very often labeled for foreigners under the name of guangxi, which basically just means connection. But first of all, modern life has weakened this in China just as much as in other countries. And secondly, there is something else which is very, very important, is that if speaking of connections, China is one of the most digitally connected nations in the world. Now, I know this is difficult to imagine looking at China from the outside in, because China is largely cut off from the digital circulation of the rest of the world. But within China, through applications like WeChat, everybody keeps in touch on a minute-by-minute basis. And whatever you need, whoever you want to find, you can find them in seconds. Shops, friends, classmates, services, doctors, payments, whatever you need. One of the best proofs of this was the pandemic itself and the subsequent zero COVID policy that locked entire cities down. But while people were isolated physically, they were hyper-connected digitally with each other. And I think if connectedness is one of the most important factors in human happiness, then here Chinese people and their habits of instantly replying to messages day and night and purchasing everything online probably help them to keep their balance, even despite the difficulties that they experienced in the last couple of years. And finally, one essential ingredient of life satisfaction, according to the Ipsos study, is believing in a better tomorrow. And if you walk the streets of Chinese cities, this is what you are going to find basically all Chinese people to believe in, that the tomorrow will be better than yesterday. Why? Because yesterday is much better than the day before. And if you go back a generation or two or a decade or two, there is absolute proof in the eyes of Chinese people that progress is tremendous. It makes everybody's life better and better every day. You see, even 20 years ago, when I arrived in China in 2002, poverty was much higher. The public transport system was much more primitive. Very, very few people had mobile phones. There were queues everywhere for basic products. I, as a foreigner, had certain privileges, but many people could only dream about luxuries like McDonald's food or a cup of Starbucks coffee. By the way, premium brands in China were at a very, very early stage of development. China has doubled and tripled all of their basic indicators every decade since then. And if people see this kind of development, then you cannot blame them for believing in a better tomorrow. And that's why when you meet Chinese people at a negotiation or as their boss or even online, you are going to feel this self-confidence, this self-assuredness, which comes from the experience that I just described right now. Does it necessarily reflect the situation of the general average of the statistical majority of the country? I really don't think so. Is this important for everybody who does business in China or with China? I absolutely think so. If you haven't read the study yet, please check the link in the description of this video. And I very much hope to see you at one of my online events soon.